Hello everyone, Antony Cummins here. I'm a historical researcher working on historical ninjutsu and samurai warfare. And today we're going to be doing a brief overview of Onmyodo and Taoism. Now, Taoism is the Chinese religion, if you like, that philosophy that follows the Tao. And Onmyodo means the way of Yin Yang for Japanese. So how did the two meet? How did Taoism and Japan combine? So today I've asked Scott from Sengoku Studies. Now you must follow Scott. I'm going to put a link below. Click the link, and I mean it, go and follow his channel. He's uploading now much more frequently and doing a lot of stuff. So he's going to take you through this. There might be slight problems with the audio because we've moved it across different places and different machines. So let's test and see if the audio is good enough. So I did a book called The Ultimate Guide to Yin Yang, so please do get yourself a copy of that if you're interested in Yin Yang and Yin Yang theory. But beyond that, let's let Scott explain, first of all, what is Taoism, then what is Onmyodo, and how the two came together.
Greetings, this is Scott from the Sengoku Studies channel. I was asked to do this video briefly talking about the relationship between Taoism and Onmyodo. For this video, I will limit coverage of Onmyodo and Onmyoji to the pre-Edo period, since in the Edo period there were serious changes made under the Tsuchimikado family, who standardized and systematized it as the official grandmasters of Onmyodo. I do not speak Chinese, so my pronunciation of Chinese words will be off. While I'm far from an expert, I hope you'll find this informative. Taoism's origins are dated back to the possibly mythical 6th century BCE Lao Tzu and his work, the Tao Te Ching. If he were real, he would have been a rough contemporary of Kungzi, Confucius. Lao Tzu is not a proper name though, and rather it means old master. In the 4th century BCE, Zhuangzi, also known as Zhuangzhou, wrote a work simply titled the Zhuangzi, and these two make up the core of Taoist thought. Taoism is not a monolith, though, and there are numerous schools creating multifaceted traditions. And there are differences between religious Taoism and philosophical Taoism. Whatever differences there are, though, Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi seem fundamental in most of these schools. I will now cover a couple of the major concepts in Taoism. This will be extremely surface level, as trying to be comprehensive is a massive rabbit hole and is beyond my level of knowledge on the subject. In Taoism, at least religious Taoism that is most pertinent to Onmyodo, all existing things in the universe have a singular origin point, the Tao. Understanding the Tao allows one to understand the organic, natural, and universal order of all things. There is no will behind the Tao. There is no deity guiding it. It is just the way things are supposed to be according to natural law. They are hierarchical, natural, cyclical patterns governed by those natural laws that are predictable once you understand them. Although this dictates how things are supposed to be, that does not mean that they always go that way. Taoism uses a variety of practices to try to harmonize with the Tao and put the universe in the proper order. The eternal Tao can only be perceived through experience and intuition by humans if they have transcended normal human abilities and boundaries. To this end, there are a number of supernatural and occult practices associated with Taoism, as well as individuals with supernatural powers and beings such as immortals. Taoism also led to some real-world things as well. The interest in observation and looking for predictable patterns led the ancient Chinese to begin understanding movements of the stars and other celestial bodies, allowing them to track time and create calendars, among other things. The practice of alchemy led to an understanding and development of chemistry. It is in these ways, among others, that some of Taoism is sometimes called natural science. It was not solely supernatural. The core of Taoist metaphysics can be found in the Tao and other concepts. Yin Yang cosmology is rather famous due to this well-known symbol. It can be found in the earliest creation myths of the universe in Chinese culture. Out of basically a single source, this would be the Tao, two opposite forces developed, Yin and Yang, and everything in the universe is related to either Yin or Yang. And in each there are elements of the other. They are somewhat in conflict with, and yet at the same time dependent on each other. There is no warm without cold. There is no light without darkness, and so on. Yin Yang sees the universe as an organic whole in which the natural, human, and spiritual worlds all intersect and interact. Wushing is the 5 elements, or 5 phases: earth, wood, water, fire, and metal. Although in some schools these vary. These represent the different phases of cyclical patterns. There are characteristics that are associated with each of the elements themselves. In addition to that, they have a very long and complex list of things associated with each element that can create positive or negative effects depending on a number of factors. These 5 phases or elements are some of the building blocks of things like feng shui and traditional Chinese medicine. As with yin yang, all these elements are somewhat conflicted but also somewhat dependent. Each of them is to be in the right proportion for something to be in its proper order. In addition to Yin Yang and Wuxing, Taoism typically also includes numerous other earlier beliefs, dating back supposedly to the Shang dynasty. These include the existence of nature deities, gods and goddesses, ancestor worship, and the belief in Tian, which is often translated into English as heaven. There is this other world inhabited by these spiritual beings that weaves in and out of our own. Tian is also a hierarchical natural process. It too is cycles and patterns of nature. Tian could show approval or disapproval of human action, and through omens and consequences. Gods and goddesses could also create disasters or be beneficial, and could guide humans. In addition to trying to understand the Tao, rituals were required to keep the gods and goddesses happy and to help maintain harmony in the universe. These concepts are some of the foundations of not only Taoism, but a number of aspects of Chinese culture and thought. According to numerous scholars, even Confucianism, which is often seen as a philosophy rather than a religion, accepted the basic premise that these things exist. These were often assumed elements of reality. This has been extremely simplified. Chinese religion and philosophy are very deep, rich, and complex. This brief overview is not even close to doing Taoism or any of these other subjects proper justice. But I hope it has helped foster a base understanding as we move into the relationship between Taoism and Onmyodo. So, what was Onmyodo? The term can be translated as the way of Yin Yang, as Onmyo is another way to say the characters for Inyo, Japanese for Yin Yang. Onmyodo was influenced by Taoism, but it is not simply Japanese Taoism. The Japanese term for Taoism is Dokyo. It came to Japan from the continent along with Buddhism and various folk traditions around the 5th and 6th centuries. There is a good chance that at least some of it came via Korea. There was plenty of Korean culture adapted in Japan, and a lot of Chinese culture that Japan would import, especially during these earlier centuries, came through Korea first. Taoism as a separate religious practice never really caught on in Japan, and as far as I can tell, there does not seem to have been serious attempts to set it up as an independent religion. However, elements of it mingled with various religious beliefs and cultural practices. As one example, when one goes to a Shinto shrine and pulls out a stick to draw their fortune, omikuji, that is an act influenced by Chinese numerology, which is heavily influenced by Taoism. The fortune itself is influenced by Taoist astrology. Another would be sometimes you see pentacles, the 5-pointed star, representing the 5 elements of Wushing, known in Japan as Gogyo, painted or carved at Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples. Onmyodo became an official part of the imperial government under the Ritsuryo order, instituted by the various laws broadly lumped together as the Taika reforms. The Ritsuryo state was heavily influenced by Chinese government. It even created the Onmyo-ryo, essentially a bureau of magic and divination under the Nakatsukasasho, Ministry of Central Affairs. At this time, Onmyodo was largely used as a means of divination to guide policies and decisions. Practitioners of Onmyodo were called Onmyoji. They gained political influence in the imperial court as they advised emperors and courtiers. In the Heian period especially, Onmyodo would expand in scope and go beyond divination. During the Heian period, Onmyodo became increasingly infused with and influenced by elements of Shinto, Buddhism, especially esoteric, and also Goryo belief. Goryo were the vengeful spirits of powerful aristocrats and emperors who believed they had been wronged in life and were capable of devastating acts such as famine and natural disasters. Onmyodo assumed that at least some of the Taoist metaphysics were true, but it also mishmashed together with elements of these other beliefs and practices to create a rather complicated system. Onmyodo was an amalgamation of spiritual and occult practices that included astrology, alchemy, omen interpretation, sorcery, divination, curse protection, feng shui, exorcism and purification, numerology, even some folk medicine, and some other things. But at this time, there was no single school of Onmyodo, so even though they typically had some common attributes, the details would vary. And the matrix of how Shinto, Buddhism, Taoism, and also Confucianism mixed and mingled in pre-modern Japanese culture is really rather complex. One of Onmyodo's most common uses remained divination, and that was based on various forms of Taoist divination, as well as an understanding of the natural cycle and patterns taught in Taoism. Hints as to what actions one should or should not do at a given time were believed to exist, and that could be interpreted in order to try to avoid going afoul of the natural order and creating negative consequences. Failing to do that, powers involving sorcery and exorcism and such could be used to undo those negative consequences. Many other skills in Onmyoji might have been trained in also had their roots in occult practices of Taoism, which were mentioned earlier. Even though they were not necessarily used for the same goal as in Taoism, the basic reality behind their effectiveness and their existence were believed by many people. The belief in the predictable order and cycle of nature were what made the acts of divination and omen interpretation believable. They're based on the idea that there's a certain way things are supposed to be, and that the universe tries to give humans hints as to how they're supposed to live and behave. Things like objects in the sky and odd behavior of animals could be considered as omens. It was up to the Onmyoji and the like to find these hints and try to decipher them in a meaningful and beneficial course of action. Rather than the Tao, though, this was often attributed to the kami or other supernatural beings. With the increased worry about Goryo, exorcism and sorcery became increasingly valuable as a way for not only individuals to protect themselves, but for the state to protect the nation. Aristocratic manors and palaces were built in accordance to the principles of feng shui, or if that was not possible, magic was used to protect the inhabitants from the negative consequences of doing so. These were at least loosely based in Taoist ideas. Magic spells and symbolism based in Taoist occult practices were part of Onmyodo. Things such as lucky and unlucky names, days, dates, directions, food, and such came from Taoist astrology as the base. Like many things, these were not taken whole, and parts were accepted while other parts discarded, and much of what was accepted was mixed with the other belief systems that I had previously mentioned. It was all very complex and deep, and I am not really sure exactly which part of what system fits in where. However, there certainly was a Taoist influence to the practice of Onmyodo. With the rise of the warrior class to prominence, Onmyoji began working for the Buke. Just like the imperial aristocracy, to the samurai, things like omens were important. Lucky days and directions could influence military campaigns as commanders tried to avoid the wrath of some supernatural being for going against the order of things. Men who could interpret omens, advise a course of action via divination, as well as other abilities that Onmyoji had, were considered useful. This is actually a topic that I myself would like to explore more thoroughly in the future with more research. This has been a real whirlwind of a video about a very deep, vast, and complex issue. I knew when I agreed to do this that there was going to be a lot that I would have to leave out. Thousands of pages would not be enough to cover every possible aspect. But I hope that this has provided some basic introduction to the topic. While Onmyodo was much more than just Japanese Taoism, there were certainly strong roots in Taoist metaphysics and practices. The connection between the two could be a massive research project in and of itself. I want to thank Antony for asking me to do this video. I decided to have it put on his channel since the interest came from someone that asked him, and he then asked me. Although this is not my channel, I will try to keep an eye on the comments of this video for a while to keep a lookout for questions and critiques. Anything bad about this video is my own fault. Thank you so much for taking your time to watch this video. Take care.
Right, I hope you enjoyed that, guys. It might be the first one in more videos between me and Scott, which I hope happens, and I'm looking forward to working with him more. So beyond that, get yourself a copy of the Ultimate Guide to Yin Yang, and also follow Scott. Make sure click the link below. If you've got this far in the video, you may as well click the link and go and subscribe to Scott.